Hello and welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we're discussing everything about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Happy Halloween, guys.
Yes, happy Halloween.
Today we have a guest. Today for our Halloween special. Charlotte, do you want to introduce
have returning
yourself?
champion Charlotte.
Yes.
Hello.
Woohoo. Charlotte, do you want to give us a fun fact? I say a fun fact, a fun book fact. What's your favourite book? There we go.
Oh, okay, because my fun fact was going to be that I broke my leg playing roller derby.
Okay, well, that is the coolest possible way to break your leg.
Fact.
Like,
Yes.
I think the fun fact would be that previously owned a bookshop, and this was not a great plan.
I mean, that is also very cool.
Yes, well, we've mentioned the bookshop. I think we talked about it in previous seasons, right? So yes, this is Charlotte of that bookshop.
Sadly, no longer
alumna of that bookshop. Yes, or rather,
alumnus.
no, because alumna is the feminine, right? And then alumnum if you're me. And,
I don't know.
And inert.
we're doing terrible Latin declension on this.
I don't do Latin. I did science.
I did a little bit of
Anyway.
ancient Greek, but I was disturbed by how frequently we had to use the word slave.
Ah, yeah. In Latin, it's death. It's all death words all the time.
I mean, I feel Latin and Halloween, like, as
I was
going to
say, is this time to derailment like the fastest we've ever had? Yeah.
But yes, it's Spooky Gay Christmas, and we're doing spooky gay Christmas things.
Yes, we are doing a special pre-season 4 because season 4 is happening. We are doing it. We're very excited about it. And this is the warm-up episode for Halloween because, ooh, spooky.
It's the first pancake of the batch, so if it comes out weird, it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be great.
Great.
I think we need to start, as always, with our terrible summary. And if you're new to the podcast, this is the first time listening, you're like, WTF is a terrible summary.
Is this terrible summary or like potential episode titles?
Yes.
Because I haven't quite formulated my terrible title yet, but it's something about like everyone hates this evil twink or something, you know? You won't believe what this evil twink has been doing. Everyone hates him.
I think I'm back at what we had for Frankenstein. I'm just like, local mad scientist experiences a consequence, take 2.
I mean, but let's be honest, basically, this book was shorter than I expected, mainly because I listened to this on a run and then it was like, the audiobook is finished. I was like, oh, okay. And then my favourite line of the book is, if he is Mr. Hyde, I shall be Mr. Seek.
Yeah. The
that
single
was my
dorkiest
favourite
thing ever said by a character in a classical novel, possibly ever.
Yeah. Charlotte, what would your silly / terrible summary / title be?
A trans woman hounded to death by well-meaning friends desperately trying to detransition her.
Ooh, we
Yeah.
were talking about queer readings, Em and I, but we didn't discuss that one. So very interested to see what you're cooking up. So my main takeaway from this book is like very little actually happens. I thought there was way more plot in this book than there actually is. In terms of just like incidents that occur. Like, we really don't actually get to see or even really hear about that much of like, okay, so, you know, Jekyll and Hyde, everybody knows is guy drinks a potion, turns into 2 guys that are share the same body, et cetera, et cetera. Or like kind of do, kind of don't. There's sort of transmorphing happening. And yeah, we don't get to see a lot of like what quote unquote the evil guy does. It's like he tramples a girl, which sucks, and then he kills an MP, which is like,
This praxis, my guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Direct action, baby.
But we actually then, that's kind of it. And then the rest of his sort of evil nature is demonstrated by the fact that everyone just hates him on sight, which I think is really interesting.
I've got to say,
Yeah.
that was the thing. This was my first time reading this, and that was the thing that maybe surprised me the most. And I don't know if just as, like, modern readers, we're really desensitized to, like, violence in horror stuff, because, like, the things we do know about are, you know, pretty nasty. It's just, like, I was sort of like, oh, is that it?
They weren't shocking to me, right?
Is that it?
Yeah.
To be honest, my background of this book was, like, I knew Jekyll and Hyde was two personalities in one body, and one of them's evil and one of them's good, and that was about the extent of it. What I didn't realise it was written by Robert Louis Stevenson. I don't know why that
Treasure Island
completely
Man
passed me by. I know, like Treasure Island Man and this, the two things did not concur in my brain.
They're quite different things. The main thing I know Robert Louis Stevenson from, and I keep pronouncing his middle name Louise, and that's not, I don't know why I'm doing that. Is it because I think he's secretly French? Anyway, I read Kidnapped. I had an abridged, illustrated version of Kidnapped that my dad, when he was a child, had coloured in the pictures of. And that's my main Stevenson book that I remember. That is also a very different vibe.
I think one of my other takeaways was like how much other adaptations and like the sort of popular conception of this is not reflected by the actual source material. Like they're not two separate people, right? It's the same person with a different outlook and a different motivations and inhibitions, and they share memories. Right?
I mean, crucially, the book says quite textually is that it's not even that Jekyll is good. Jekyll isn't good. Everything that's in Hyde is in Jekyll. Yep. It's just that Jekyll has, kind of like conflicting emotions. So
he's sort of split it off from himself out of shame.
Except it's still in him.
Exactly. And one of the fascinating things about Hyde is that Hyde is, the only character in the entire novel who's like, is at peace with himself.
I would make a case for Utterson, actually. I know we don't get to see a lot of his interiority, but he's sort of like, the introduction to him is like, he's like the most boring dude alive, and he doesn't like, he has some friends, but like he is well liked by those friends, and he seems quite, there's that bit about, he drinks gin so that he doesn't develop a taste for nice wine, but there's not an indication that he's miserable about this decision.
He's not conflicted about it. It's just I'd like to keep enjoying this with friends, so I'm not going to overdo it in private. Kind of thing. It feels more like temperance. I imagine
there is a sort of morality angle to it, as well as that it would be a quote unquote bad thing to like what nice wine too much or indulge in it too much. But it's not a source of such conflict and shame as Jekyll describes growing up with, right?
I've got to say, and I think there's moments where Utterson is sort of, you get this hint of an inner man to Utterson, but it's always like he's just friendlier. He's just nicer. And that's the bit that his friends are all like, once you get to know him, you see that there's a nicer guy inside there, and now that's who we're friends with, kind of thing.
I wonder if that's like an interesting, him as a foil to Jekyll, who does have this sort of conflict and shame, and it means that Utterson could never relate to the reasons that Jekyll does what he does. And yeah.
I mean, I think Utterson is a really, really fascinating character. I absolutely read him as being gay, by the way, and I think that a lot of things that there's lots of kind of subtle hints about the way that Utterson is portrayed in the thing that kind of, for me, sell this idea of kind of like a gay person trying to live very, very discreetly in society.
And his live and let live attitude, he takes that to almost extremes, I would say. He's very much like, I'm not going to stick my nose in. I don't want to ask questions. I regret asking questions. There's never any sort of sense
but then when he meets Hyde, and that kind of goes out the window a little bit. Like he is just like, wow, this dude sucks, and I'm going to try and protect my friend from him. Like he does stick his nose in.
I don't even necessarily think that he doesn't stick his nose in. If anything, one thing that I really like, when it's like in the first kind of opening bit, it talks about him often being like the last, kind of good friend of downward going men. And so it's like, no, it's not even that he's keeping his own business. It's that he remains a friend to people who are, clearly facing some kind of criminal issues or kind of would otherwise be rejected from society. So if anything, he seems kind of nicer because he's not just like washing his hands of stuff. He's actually continuing to be around people who would otherwise be ostracized.
I wonder how that would have read contemporaneously to people who like, that's very biblical Jesus. It's not American folk Christianity Jesus, and I would argue it's not something that's like called out in like, I was raised in the church, but Jesus as the person who hangs out with sex workers and tax collectors and all the unliked people of society. I wonder how that note about his character would have fit with the rest of his character in that context to people.
It's interesting that you say that, because I feel like Utterson was the place where I was weirdly most feeling like I was lacking context. I was sitting there going, how is a Victorian person like receiving this guy? Because I I almost couldn't tell if we were supposed to think that, you know, he's a good guy. He is a good guy, or he's just so passive that he won't put his foot down about. You know, I couldn't quite, because I agree. I think it's in some ways. I think it's you can read it as a very positive thing that he's, you know, the last friend of you know, people who are in a downward spiral. But the text also says that he makes all of his friends like just by like it's just people who've known him the longest. And it's just that he doesn't bother to remove himself. Like it feels like there's no active choice and like, being involved.
He definitely felt like he has his friends, and that's kind of that's it. And he's very, I don't know, in my very speedy audiobook listening of this book, like it felt like he was still very loyal. And I think one question I had is, what do you guys think about, because in a similar way to Frankenstein and to some ways Dracula, that there's a lot of beats in this book that are now in pop culture, and the horror of it is you go into this book knowing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person.
Yeah,
you know that because that's in pop culture. So do you think that takes away from some of the novel? Because in my book, like at the end of it, you know, if you haven't read this book before, you know,
you'll have no idea who Utterson is, probably, because he's not in any of the adaptations.
Yeah, and you know that there's it's kind of like a bit of a mystery that, you know, that Utterson sees Mr. Hyde, he sees Jekyll. They're two separate people. They're two physically like different. Described physically differently,
which is something I actually wasn't expecting from
again.
pop
I
culture.
wasn't expecting that, but you know that they are the same person. And for me, I felt it kind of took away a bit from the twist at the end when it's explaining what he's done.
Well, it added to that sense of is that it for me a little bit? Was sort of like the great twist is something that we all already know.
I think the thing that was new to me was reading Jekyll's account of it, right, which you get at the very end is a letter that he's written before he transforms into Hyde for the last time and subsequently dies, and his conception of what he's done and what's happened as being that he's created a person or separated out a person from himself that is all the things he's ashamed of, what he conceives of as being his evil nature, but I think is more probably accurately characterized by like the things of himself, like that he's ashamed of about himself.
I mean, I think crucially what we get at the end is we get Jekyll's statement. We never anywhere in the book hear anything directly from Hyde. And there's questions to be is like, you know, is this... So I mean, first up, the entire nature of the book is to withhold information and deliberately so, and make that part of the text you're reading. Like, I'm working on a video essay. I've got a whole ramble about how the entire first chapter brings up so many questions that are just completely unanswered and never raised again.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of part of it. But also, we never hear directly from Hyde. So then you're left with the final closing statement being like, well, yes, it's revealed the tryst to some extent, but also we only have Jekyll's perspective on that.
Yeah. And I've got to say, I think there was leading into that, I think I had a somewhat, like, I was almost immediately defensive of Hyde because we only got external views of him. The way that everybody immediately just looked at him and went, oh, the vibes, rancid. I was like, do I trust you, mysterious older Victorian gentleman?
Like, that's simply growing up autistic. Like, that's just what it is to grow up with autism, isn't it? Like,
I was just thinking, my absolute take on this is Edward Hyde is just a clocky trans woman.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me.
That was the thing that I think I'd been kind of primed for it because I'd the sentence about the reference to Queer Street was a few pages on, and I looked back in my edition at what the editor's notes were about that because I didn't actually know the etymology. I knew it wasn't to do with queerness in the modern sense, but I wasn't sure what it was. And then the editor had put in scare quotes queer theorists when talking about this reference. And I think the editor is right that Queer Street is not a reference, I think, to queer people in the What's It. But, like, it did prime me to immediately be like, yes, the reaction that you get, like, I think the first time I got called a lesbian was as an insult when I was 8. So none of us were, like, actually experiencing any kind of romantic or sexual, but instantly they were like, people, that kind of people looking at you and going instantly, something's wrong here. And I'm like, that's sympathetic to me. That's sympathetic to me. That doesn't make me immediately go, Hyde is evil. That makes me go, that's one of my people. Which is then, of course, he goes and tramples a toddler, so that's sort of like, but...
Well, again...
I don't know if she's a toddler, but she is a child.
And again, here's the thing: is that we only ever get these perspectives through people who kind of are presenting it to others, so they're always secondhand
and friends of Jekyll's.
Yeah, and the thing is, I every time I see them, I always kind of read them a little bit as being like, well, I could absolutely read this as being a description of a hate crime, but from the perspective of somebody who didn't realise that it was a hate crime, or from the perspective of one of the perpetrators.
Yeah,
like we very rarely get specifics. We already get like, oh no, he trampled a girl. Well, did he?
Well,
or did he, kind of knock into her? Did she run into him?
And particularly since the doctor says there's nothing actually wrong with her. When the doctor gets on the scene, she's scared, but the doctor says she isn't really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously it is, if we're to take it as on faith, that it happened as they described, that's still, like, he's run into somebody by accident and not go back. Okay, in an ideal world, you'd go back, you wouldn't trample a child, you'd be paying attention to where you were going. But it is the sort of thing where you could see how... And then the fact that they all kind of immediately go to, well, give us lots of money, or we'll do violence to you, or, ruin
social
your reputation.
Violence, at least,
or, Yeah, it's... I totally see what you mean. That it's like, we're always getting this external view of Hyde's actions.
I mean, if it's not jumping ahead too much, if we could just jump straight to the murder, because I think there's a very similar thing there. Because there's only one witness to the murder, and that witness, by her own testimony, was asleep at the time.
Yep. And even if the events that happened are completely as described, we don't know what their relationship was to Danvers, Carew and Hyde, right?
Yeah.
Like, if the awful crimes that Hyde has been getting up to are, like... being a woman and like perhaps engaging in an affair with an MP who doesn't want anybody to find out about it because Victorian, like you can easily see how that ends in a death.
Yeah,
like Danvers Carew refusing to pay for Hyde's abortion.
Like there's so many, and obviously like very speculative reading there, but we have so little actual textual information about anything.
Yeah.
And Charlotte's point about the fact that we just never hear from Hyde directly. Like, there's basically only 2 scenes where he even speaks.
And I don't think he ever particularly in those scenes, like, comes across as having done anything particularly. His manners, he's maybe a bit, he's a bit brusque with Utterson, but in a way that is it's very clearly from our perspective a result of the miscommunication. That he thinks that Jekyll has told Utterson the truth about him. And that would, understandably, you would lose your shit a little bit there, But I think, I also think that something that's probably different for a modern reader is the fact that there's a lot of stuff, a lot of the language they use to indicate that Hyde's vibes are rancid are things that we now go, yes, that's good old Victorian scientific racism. The description of him as troglodytic, the idea that he's got some kind of deformity that they can sense but can't quite see, And all of that is making me go, yes, again, you are describing one of my people. Stop.
I'm not sure they ever
that.
actually use the word deviant, but it sort of feels like that's exactly the vibe that they're trying to convey.
There's a lot of inherent ableist, like things that we now think of as ableist language. That we'd immediately clock as being, this is bigot shit. This is racism. This is eugenics shit. This is the glorious progress towards civilization nonsense that is, inherent in Victorian colonialism. Which immediately
when we were talking about it this week, you were talking about like the politics of disgust, which is exactly what this is, right?
Yeah. They're all kind of there's a moral judgment being made on the basis of them sort of looking at him and recoiling.
One thing that I really loved is that when they go to his little, like, kind of secret apartment in Soho where he, like, goes and does his, like, whatever he gets up to. They go in, they can't help but say, it is quite nicely furnished. And he has got a very good selection of wine here.
Yeah.
like, it's like, okay, well, how much they may be othering him. Actually, they've got him in, like, there's things about this guy we kind of like and vibe with.
Yeah. This was going to lead me on to I was thinking about crimes. So I'll start with the fun question, thinking about the crimes, since we've already
just taking
kind of
the
covered.
text at face value, right?
Yeah.
Like
what are Hyde's secret crimes? Wrong answers only, please. I think he's a clown at children's parties.
Stealing traffic cones or stealing signs and taking them back to his room drunk and then forgetting about it and waking up in the morning going, where did I get that sign from?
I think he's capturing pigeons and releasing them into the homes of people that he doesn't like.
Oh, that's
Bing bong.
Vicious. I was going to go with being drunk in charge of cattle.
I think he fell afoul of that one rule in that one state in America that's like you can't push a moose out of a plane.
Oh my gosh.
It's completely anachronistic. There are no planes, but somehow he did it.
Like playing a trombone in a car. He can't play a trombone whilst trying to steer a horse and cart.
He's guilty of pushing a moose out of a plane, right? But in order to do it, he also had to commit, like, crimes against the timeline. So he's committing, like, time travel crime as well.
Yeah, the time cops are after him.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that would explain why nobody ever goes into specifics as to what exactly he's done, because they'd be like, look, okay, there's a lot of background we've got to give here. Like, okay, so Doctor Who hasn't been invented yet, so I've got to go on. Let's see, what have we got at this point? I mean, would we have... what's his name? Jules Verne yet?
I'm not
Isaac
sure.
Asimov? Would you have Isaac Asimov?
No, that's later.
No,
I
Asimov
think.
is the 20th century, yeah.
Asimov is golden age of sci-fi, which is like 30s
50s?
to 60s, I think.
Oops.
Yeah.
I got myself muddled up there.
Listen, linear time is fake and the enemy.
I always do think that Verne is later than he is, though. Yeah, I don't know what time travel sort of stories and like, you know, what the state of time travel sci-fi was
I think I
when
was
this was being written.
H.G. Wells is a little later than this, I think, and I definitely remember... I read the introduction of my edition because it's like the Oxford World Classics one or something. And it did mention H.G. Wells being influenced by Jekyll and Hyde. So, you know, I've connected the two dots. You ain't connected shit. I've connected them. But
I think I was thinking of H.G. Wells when I said Jules. That's what I was thinking of.
fair.
I was thinking of H.G. Wells too, because he did The Time Machine. It wasn't Verne.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was
Is
thinking
Verne
right.
30,000 Leagues Under the Sea?
Yes.
Is that him?
and
Yes,
around the
that's what I
world in
meant.
80 days. Yeah.
Oh,
I was
this
thinking
guy.
of Time Machine. So that was, Google says, 1895. I can't read.
So after this, because this was... I forget
1886.
when it was written. 86.
No.
Yes, because it's before Jack the Ripper, because we were discussing whether or not Hyde could be Jack the Ripper. Except the thing is that in universe, we also don't hear about Hyde's crimes making the news or anything. Like, you know, if this had been happening at the time that the Ripper murders were happening, which were highly publicised, in universe, everybody would have gone, well, it's that guy that we hate, right? Surely he's the Ripper.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, it's even better than that. So this book was extremely popular, and they started doing like theatrical versions of it almost immediately, to the point where I think during the Ripper murders, I think there were 2 different theatrical versions of this being produced.
Oh, wow.
And because...
And presumably they worked it in because nobody has, like, you know...
worse
they
than
wouldn't.
that.
They wouldn't have. Yeah, they wouldn't have not done that out of sort of respect for the victims, right? They're like,
No. Even worse than that. One of the actors, because he did such a good job of playing, you know, kind of like Hyde as being, you know, kind of hunched over and things, and is that people started to go, oh well, he's such a good actor. Of course, he's the murderer, and they had to stop doing
my
the
goodness.
theatre run because people thought that when the actor might be the killer.
well, people
that's
have always sucked,
terrible.
huh?
I mean, I feel that just shows that people throughout just what the hell?
Yeah. The whole confusing fact and fiction thing.
Okay, I have another question, which is, so let's say that Jekyll was correct about his conception of what has happened, is that he's managed to split off all the evil parts of himself from, you know, but because he wasn't pure of heart enough, he remained the sort of mixed bag. If he had managed to split himself into a good part and an evil part, do you think the good part would be equally unsettling to people?
Ooh.
I would
That's
say
interesting.
yes, because I feel like, I don't know, that I guess the whole point of this book is like you can't be purely good. like, you have to learn from your experiences and improve on, you know, no human is perfect.
Yeah, to me, the moral of this book is, like, you have to do Gestalt therapy. You have to, you can't repress shit. You know?
Yeah, you have to, like, go to therapy. Basically, that's the summary in this book, go to therapy. Everyone should go to therapy.
But, like, specifically sort of, like, you know, integrating bits of yourself that you may not have been able to countenance before for whatever reason.
I mean, I hate to be a sports sport, but the thing is, like, that what I think is really interesting is there is a stark difference between Jekyll and Hyde, the book, versus Jekyll and Hyde, every single adaptation thereafter.
Yes.
Because in the book,
oh my god, yes.
In the book, it's quite clear that, like, no, he's not doing this out of some noble trying to separate good from evil thing. He's doing
it because he doesn't like feeling shame. Feeling shame makes him feel gross and he doesn't want to anymore.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And he wants to indulge. He wants to be like, I want to do the fucked up evil shit that I've always wanted to do, and I don't want to feel bad about it.
Which is actually extremely Victorian, but I think that didn't quite, you know, sit right with people, which is why all the adaptations thereafter are like, no, noble doctor trying to separate good from evil. And also the other, like, two massive changes that happen in every single other version is, like, they make him a lot younger, and they always give him a love interest.
Yes, and they give Hyde a love interest who is inevitably a sex worker that he does violence to. Like, it's just, where has this come from? And it comes back to another thing which Em put in the notes, which is, like, why are there no women? Yeah. What happened to all the women? Where have they gone?
Yeah, like, actually, that's a very good point. Like, apart from maybe the maid, but
yeah, I
don't know. Is it?
And apparently this is something that Stevenson got criticised for in a lot of his books, actually. Or, like, people had mentioned it, that his characters lived in a womanless world. Like, what the hell's that about?
But how many Victorian, I guess, like, men would have still been because there's not even mentioned, like, their widows or, like, anything like that. There's just, you are completely right. It's just not mentioned at all.
Well, they're living in bachelor London. It's a secret second London, like the one that Hyde lives in, that is perpetually spooky and has nobody else in it.
Sorry, I'm looking at, are there any adaptations that have played with gender in Jekyll and Hyde, right? Yeah. And so Dr. Jekyll with Susie Izzard in it, and I don't know if it's out yet or whatever, but I just Googled, like, Jekyll and Hyde transgender, and
oh my god, Susie, come on the pod.
Yeah, like, Izzard takes on the dual role of the wealthy and reclusive Dr. Nina Jekyll and her terrifying other half, Rachel Hyde. And I don't know if she's doing gender with it, or if it's just that the character is a trans woman. I don't know if the plot is gendered in that way. But anyway, that's really interesting.
And this is really interesting, because I think it is very specifically, one of the gendered lenses we can look at it through is that one of the main themes of the book is that like toxic masculinity and repression of one's inner desires, whatever the hell they are, is damaging in some way. Like, we could look at it as a commentary on performing masculinity, because that is a thing that Jekyll talks about, is that it's that he is playing a part so that other people will find him acceptable.
Or so that he'll find himself acceptable. You know, that's part of it too.
So my take on this, and I think it's true. Okay, Stevenson, he does, you know, kind of like, he generally fails to include women in his stories, and I think part of that is, like, just, you know, a failure of perspective. But I think in this story, it kind of works. But then again, that's also because my reading on this story is that this is, you know, kind of, it's an elderly gay polycule.
It is. There are very few actual characters. There really is. There's Jekyll and Hyde. There's Utterson, there's Lanyon, is that his name?
Yeah.
Langdon, yeah.
And the one who Utterson is talking with in the beginning.
Enfield, yeah.
Enfield, yes. There's very few other characters, and then there's the staff of Jekyll's household.
Yeah.
And one of the lines that always sticks with me is, like, after this big falling out, one thing that Utterson says is, you know, we're very old friends. We're not going to live to make others, which always gets me in the feels. Like, it's like, you know, this real tragedy of, like, these people have so few people in their lives, so the people that are in their lives are actually incredibly precious and important to them.
Yeah. Which adds, you know, is a tasty character nuance to the fact that they are all so desperately trying to keep Jekyll with them. They don't know what's ailing him. They don't know the exact specifics of his relationship to Hyde. They don't even really know if he's in danger of being murdered or not.
Because he keeps talking about disappearance.
Yeah.
He suspects he's going to disappear.
But they are all clinging on to him for dear life.
And by doing so, they are driving him further and further into the closet, and it's actually really kind of tragic. Like we talked about,
especially given that the introduction to Utterson that we have is that he's like quite tolerant of a lot of stuff, and that if Jekyll had just spoken to him about this, and obviously there's all the reasons that he couldn't, but that maybe that Utterson would have been understanding, and there would have been, he wouldn't have been alone anymore.
And the thing I love about that is I think that makes it truly tragic, because the tragedy comes not from the circumstance but from character. It actually probably would have all been fine had Jekyll spoken, kind of honestly to Utterson about what's happening, but Jekyll couldn't because of his internalized shame. So it's this, it's this personal tragedy that this is why I love this book and why I keep coming back to it. Is that it's, I think it really does stand up to repeat readings for these nuances and these, kind of really quite interesting moments of kind of the homosocial intimacy.
Yeah, this is kind of, we're all sort of been kind of dancing around the I did wonder if because I walked into this thinking about it kind of like a mystery novel, and thinking obviously I knew that about Jekyll and Hyde and what their actual relationship was, but I kept sort of going, is it possible to work out what Stevenson thought Jekyll's Hyde's crimes were? Is it possible, is there enough evidence in there to work out what exactly Stevenson thought he was doing, and are we supposed to be able to tell?
Or is it a black box of is it a sort of just a stand-in for crimes against society? Or
and that would be a perfectly like acceptable horror thing of the thing that you can imagine is always worse than showing it on screen.
Yeah, but did Stevenson have something in mind that Hyde was doing?
Yeah,
I was doing some research for this, and there is an article that I read that is really, really fascinating, and kind of looks at the proximity of this to a particular bit of legislation that was brought in 1885. And this was the Le Boucher Amendment. It's a piece of legislation which made it much, much easier to prosecute gay men. Basically, prior to that, it was almost impossible, unless you literally caught somebody in the middle of having butt sex, it was extremely difficult to prove sodomy.
Yeah.
And basically this amendment made it much, much easier to prosecute gay men, and less than a decade later it was going to be used to prosecute Oscar Wilde. I've got a quote from the article here.
Yeah.
So this was from the blog Crime Reads, and the author is Jill Dearman. The quote I've got is, "The actual date of the law's passage, August 14th, 1885. According to Stevenson's biographer Frank McLynn, most of the writing of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was done in September and October of 1885, so immediately following the passage of that law.
Yeah.
The novella's publication date was January 5th, 1886. Could this have played into the extreme urgency with which Stevenson felt driven to write the story? You do the math," end quote.
I'd like to just interject and say that you have instantly made this the most thoroughly researched episode of the podcast.
Yeah, I was going to also say that as well. I'm like reading Wikipedia.
This is good. You're raising the tone.
You're basically like our equivalent of Dictionary Corner.
So I think this is really interesting. One of the there were a couple of things in the introduction that jumped out at me with this, and one of them was that one of Stevenson's friends was openly campaigning for the legalization of homosexuality. So that's one. But also that Stevenson later got kind of, to be fair, I think the critical reception got extremely, weird and frenzied later. And a lot of people were, as the adaptations, attest, were taking it in directions that weren't backed up by the text at all. But he said something to the effect of, "I don't know why everybody keeps assuming that Hyde's crimes are slutty crimes. There's nothing wrong with being a slut. I am a slut." I think the word he used was voluptuary, but so I thought that was also kind of interesting in this context.
Yeah, thinking about readings that I don't think are actually very well supported by the text, the really obvious one that a lot of adaptations go for is drugs. But I actually, having thought about it, I don't, and because everyone goes, "Oh, well, Stevenson was an opium user," but so was, bloody everybody, right? Or at least authors, I guess. It was very, But I actually don't think that the drugs reading is that compelling. once you've read Jekyll's account.
It's certainly not the thing that jumps out at me. You know, it's not, I don't read it and immediately go, yes, addiction, when they're describing, you know, Jekyll taking the potion. What it reads to me as is a continued, it's the same thing that led to Hyde being a thing in the first place, is that this contradiction between, like, restraint and doing what you want, and how choosing restraint every time is difficult. And the more that you do, the more in practice you are, the easier it is. And the more you choose to let that go, the harder it is to get back. You know? Which I guess can play with an addiction thing, but I think it makes it so much more about willpower. It doesn't
But restraint in and of itself is not, it's morally neutral, right? Because it could be restraint from doing harm, or it could be restraint from living.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that Hyde is quite clearly happy. So, again, taking the queer reading of it, it's like, oh, you're addicted to being gay. It's like...
Yeah,
well, if somebody does...
you're addicted to those hormones, you'll need them for the rest of your life. And it's just like, yeah, I'm going to keep wearing glasses too. What of it, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then again, like, you know, that's an angle that lots and lots of adaptations take, is that they make it a drug allegory. Which
yeah, I think there are stories that definitely work well that way, or like, you know, kind of sit well with that. But also, it's been done, and I feel like it's been done in more accurate and more interesting ways. But also, drug allegories as well also tend to just fall, like, you know, they just tend to become kind of trite morality plays of portraying things as like an inevitable descent. Very, very rarely. Like, Super Hands in Peep Show is the only one that springs to mind, is that it's incredibly rare for you to see a depiction of somebody who is like a stable drug addict.
Yeah, like, it's in all sort of drug addiction stories, or in so many of them, you're supposed to, as the audience, come into it with the belief that simply using drugs is morally bad.
Yeah.
At all, ever, for any reason, right? And as soon as you don't have that belief, a lot of the stories stop making sense.
And then that means that you're then into the situation where you basically fall into this trap of seeing people who are on drugs as being, well, in some ways they're already dead, so we actually don't have any moral obligation to save them, or it's impossible to save them, so, you know, it's all a tragedy.
Or as soon as you associate with them, you're contaminated, or any number of...
Then we're back at queer allegory again, aren't we? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a Kill James Bond episode where they talked about, like, co-locating homosexuality and death, and it's a very, very similar thing with drug addiction, and also mental health, actually, quite a lot in a lot of media.
I badly need to listen to that podcast, but I feel like I want to watch every movie before I listen to the episode on it, and that's work. And I'm a procrastinator. If I am nothing else, I am a procrastinator.
Fair and also valid. Maybe that's actually one of Hyde's crimes. He's a serial procrastinator. Jekyll's like, I'm so tired of working so hard and going to all my appointments and like filling out people's prescriptions on time. Maybe I just want to lie back in my laboratory and do fuck all.
Hyde is just on Twitter. That's his crime, is he's on Twitter.
And this is why Hyde has this lovely little apartment in Soho, stocked with nice wines and things. It's like, no, this is my procrastination pad.
Yeah.
I was going to say his crime is being like an influencer, and that's why he's getting all these brand deals from the nice wines.
Oh no!
He's a wine influencer. Yeah.
Worst of all, they find an old mic. They find like, you know, kind of a microphone and wax cylinders that he's been recording to. And I was like, oh my goodness,
he's a podcaster. No.
The worst of all possible crimes. I want to say one last thing about like the kind of like crime gap, and then we can maybe, I don't know, we can move the discussion along. Which was that I think it's interesting that the crimes that we do see are they're all violent. It's all violent crimes, right? It's a trampling and a brutal beating to death. And we know about these, and we know about them. Like in the case of the trampling, it's like pretty much the first thing we find out about Hyde. And in the murder, everybody immediately knows that it's Hyde. And then we have this gap. And if Hyde is doing other violent crimes, if that's the thing that Jekyll wants to do free from restraint and shame, why don't we know about any of the others? And is it because it's all people that are of a lower social class? Is it people that our main characters don't care about? Or is it just not happening? Are these the only two? Because that's kind of interesting to me.
Definitely there is a running theme of selective lenses and selective enforcement. So, opening chapter, all the inquisitiveness gets directed at Hyde. Nobody asks where the fuck what's his name Enfield was going from or to. Nobody asks why the girl's being sent for a doctor. Nobody asks why did the doctor show up anyway, even when the girl didn't go and fetch him.
This is a very good point.
I thought it was that she went to go and fetch him and was on her way back. That was my understanding of that last question, but it's minor, right? Like, sort of. Why is Hyde the only one whose movements and motives are immediately sort of suspect?
And why do we only have 2 instances? You know, why if it's something that everybody, it's characterized. All the things we know about are characterized by people immediately knowing that it's Hyde that did it and that they're violent, and we don't have. But those are the only 2. We don't have anything else. And I've just connected some dots, and it's and
the dots I've connected is there's a school shooting in America, and immediately a bunch of right-wing people go, oh, well, it must have been a transgender Antifa that did it, right? It's Hyde representing again some sort of social boogeyman that you know people simply hate for existing.
And another thing when it comes to like selective, kind of observation and selective enforcement of things, it's really, really telling that Utterson is kind of a cab. Like there is a scene where he's accompanying, some police, and it kind of talks about like how even the most upstanding of people will occasionally be in fear of the officers of the law.
It's the whole the Vimes thing of being like everybody's afraid of the police. Everybody thinks they're guilty of something deep in their subconscious thing.
And he's trying to investigate this all privately, and basically a lot of what he comes back with is like, okay, well, we can find some way to blackmail him. And the hypocrisy, because they're worried that Hyde is blackmailing Jekyll, but they see no problem whatsoever with blackmailing Hyde to get him to go away.
Yeah, yeah. I thought this is an interesting one because it also, the setup reminded me a little of, there are a few KJ Charles books that are Victorian murder mystery type things, but they have a lot of characters in these sort of classes and professions that our main 3 are in, and it was giving me, it felt very similar that they also have this kind of like, oh, so we're going to solve this privately, we can't trust the police. Yeah, I don't know, it was a resonance that had that I thought was interesting. I was going to ask actually, what did anybody think of like the narrative structure? Because I mean, for me, obviously this was new, and I was quite surprised by like how the text was laid out. How we sort of were looping around the incidents and getting different people's perspectives every time and sort of narrowing down on what Jekyll thinks.
Yeah, I didn't expect to get Jekyll's perspective posthumously. I thought we would get more of him. Yeah. I thought we would get more of him sort of alive.
I think it surprised me. I mean, I guess it surprised me just like in a different way, but like similar to how in Dracula you're kind of, because it was the book that had spooky castle, spooky vampire, and then likewise with, I guess, Frankenstein, like you heard for the point of view of Frankenstein's monster, which I wasn't expecting at all, like coming into it completely fresh, like no. And I guess the thing that surprised me, I've mentioned before, this book is really short. That surprised me. Like we kind of didn't really find the whole truth. And then at the end, there's a twist of who Jekyll and Hyde are. And I guess, like I've already mentioned, I think if you going into it somehow completely blind from pop culture and had no idea if Jekyll and Hyde were the same person, I don't know, let's say you read it as like a child and you just had no idea, then I think it would be a really interesting twist. But it felt like when I've read, well, I guess my point of comparison from more recent books I've read with Brandon Sanderson, for example, normally in his books they have they have a big roller coaster and then there's a big twist at the end. You're like, oh, boom, like emotional roller coaster. And the second time you read it, you're expecting that ending. And depending on the book and how I feel about it, some of them I'm like, I will happily reread this book again, and some of them I don't get the same reaction from, and I'm kind of like, I'm a bit like okay. And I felt with this book, it felt like that latter one, like even though you're effectively, I know I'm reading it fresh, but you know what the twist is.
And you also don't have that prior experience of maybe having read it and not known, and then had affection for that experience, which kind of brings you back to it. You're just, it
was like you already know. And then when it ended on the note that basically it was Jekyll's letter, if memory serves, the book just ended.
We have no idea what Utterson did next.
Like, there's no, like,
if he also, like, died of horror like Lanyon did.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, like, what a mood. It's like, I've had a fright and I will not recover. I'm going to go away and die. Like, I feel like that.
He simply tucked his arms and legs into his body and rolled away to death.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly for the time, it's very, very trendy. Kind of, this is classic Gothic storytelling. You know, kind of a lot of it is secondhand. A lot, the closing elements of it are supposedly completely verbatim in universe documents. And so, kind of, this was like, you know, kind of the strategy is very popular for adding an air of verisimilitude to things. You know, kind of to help with the suspension of disbelief. It is notable that this has never really been adapted into any of the stage productions, because it's like, yeah, this is really hard to do on stage, and also everyone knows the twist, so there's not really much point.
Yeah.
I actually have a counter question.
Oh, yeah.
How would you think the story would be better or worse if it didn't have the last 2 chapters? If it didn't have the account of Dr. Langdon and it didn't have the account of Jekyll? So it closes literally when they break in the door and they find...
Dead Hyde.
Yeah.
Because that's not the guy that they're expecting to get murdered. That's not the way round we're expecting that to go.
Yeah, and from their perspective, and then us as the audience, where the hell is Jekyll?
Yeah.
Like...
And is Jekyll somehow responsible for this? Like...
Leaving it on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I don't know, I like a resolved book, so I think I'd be more annoyed if it wasn't resolved.
Well, there's so much that is left unresolved still. I think...
That is fair.
To me, the thing that I find really compelling is what Jekyll thinks is happening, and whether or not he's right. And so far as there is such a thing as, like, saying whether or not he's right, but, like, you know, that he's tried to separate out these parts of himself that he's ashamed of, and here's what's happened, and actually materially, you know, sort of, was he right, you know... Did this help him? And obviously it didn't. That's the bits that I find really compelling. So I will say personally, no, that's, you know, not having that be something we have access to as the audience. I think I'd find it very hard to reconstruct that from the book without the last 2 chapters.
Yeah, I think
it was sort
fair.
of, you know, like, I love speculative readings, obviously, but I think that would be quite a hard one to get to. And so I like that I've been given it.
Yeah. I like, on the one hand, I'm sort of like, it's leaning into all of these other gaps that we've already talked about. The, like, you know, what was Jekyll doing when he was younger that made him, you know, try and construct this face? What is happening between the trampling and the murder that, you know, is also apparently disgraceful and needs Hyde to be able to, you know, all of that stuff. There's already this, I think, maybe conscious use of gaps to try and be like, you take advantage of that whole, the human brain will come up with worse shit than you know, they'll fill in the gaps worse than anything you could sort of explicitly describe. And so I feel like it would fit in that sense. But yeah, I think I agree with Eli. I think there's not enough. If you were living in a world where Jekyll and Hyde has never happened, you know, if this is a brand new concept, I don't think there's enough. I don't think you could... I'm happy for there to be mystery and for it to be unresolved, but I think where it's at right now, it would be just slightly over the line.
Do you reckon without just Jekyll's testimony, though? Because then you do get Lanyon's letter saying, I saw this happen. You get the twist, but you don't quite get... You get Hyde talking about sort of like, oh, you know, behold a triumph of science or whatever.
Yeah.
And you get Lanyon's account, but not Jekyll's. That could be because then that gives you some of the building materials to be able to reconstruct Jekyll's account.
You get some resolution, but you also never find out what Jekyll thought he was doing. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. No, that is interesting.
I mean, I think on some level, I'm just not so fond of the closing 2 chapters because they're the ones where it feels like, oh god, it's a thing November Kelly talks about, like this, like getting scared and so returning to the mothership. So you've accidentally written something too radical, and so it's like, actually, no, I was bad and I shouldn't have done this.
And she was talking about how blind sight and echopraxia don't like refuse to do that. Which I don't know if we should ever do those. Like, I think we could do those for the horror stream, actually. Blind sight and echopraxia. Anyway, but yes, no, I agree. It's sort of like it gives us enough. It gives us enough answers to be able to build a bridge back to the mothership. Yeah. Instead of just sort of leaving us stranded with lots and lots of questions.
Yeah. So I've got a counter what's it to this, actually. I'm thinking about, so if, in that sense, if it's, what does Jekyll's testimony add other than if we already kind of know the twist, if we know that they're the same person and there's some sort of terrifying, transformation happening, what does it gain other than the horror? And I think something that maybe it's doing is telling us that Jekyll was making conscious decisions to do whatever this was.
Which I think adds to the tragedy a bit more.
But it also adds to the, like, okay, so if we are, playing this straight for a minute, which, why would we? But hold with me a second. If we genuinely think that Hyde is out there doing awful stuff, and, like, actually awful stuff, not just Victorians don't like it stuff.
Or, chucking a moose out of a plane.
What does that say about Jekyll? That Jekyll is deliberately making the choice to drink that potion and deliberately going, well, it's okay if my alter ego does stuff because he's not really me, and I am
Countess
over here...
Bucci Flagrante, yeah.
And I am over here being a doctor who's doing good doctor shit. So I'm not responsible.
It's not my fault. I was drunk. Yes, it was me that did the drinking, but...
Yeah, exactly.
It's okay if I stream Hogwarts Legacy if I also, like, donate to Stonewall, right?
But yeah, so I think that for me, I think if we're looking at the moral or even the crime mystery dimension, if we're looking at the question of, like, what does this mean about Jekyll specifically, I think having that chapter does do something interesting in that it's making sure we know that that Jekyll is not taking responsibility for any of this, and also that he's absolutely responsible for all of this.
Yes. It's the oh no, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions, how could this have happened?
And we've come full circle to M saying that it's just like Frankenstein, where it's local scientist experience
is a consequence. Yeah.
Because we need to ask the fun question, and because Robert Louis Stevenson also wrote Treasure Island, which has been the well-known adaptation of The Muppets Treasure Island. Who would be the only human in the Muppets adaptation?
So the boring answer is Utterson, right? Because he's the viewpoint character.
But Utterson is Gonzo and Rizzo, though. Utterson in all of his, like, staid, polite glory being replaced by Gonzo and a rat. Like, just hold that image in your mind a second.
The only human is the little girl who gets trampled at the beginning, because then you have to show a Muppet trampling her.
I was going to say Hyde's the only human. I don't know if that's too straightforward. Yes. But everybody else is a Muppet and Hyde is the only human.
Yeah.
And then whenever they talk about, like, kind of this, weird deformities, like, he seemed uncomfortably smooth.
Well, he's the only one who's not wearing a mask of some kind.
And terrible
transformation.
Terrible transformation. We just see the Muppet. We see the guy come out from under the Muppet puppet. The Muppet puppet is just dropped. The Jekyll Muppet is discarded, and the human that was moving him around comes out.
I love this. We've accidentally made something compelling.
So you got to get a puppeteer who can also act. that Venn diagram.
I hate that this is so stupid, but it also fits so perfectly thematically.
This is why Muppet adaptations are excellent and amazing, and we should have so many more of them than we actually do.
A valid discursive technique, yeah.
And I know that because this is a crime. Well, I say it's a crime. Crimes happen, as we have said in this book, and we need to have a fictional detective to solve the crimes in this book. Who would solve the crimes? Poirot, I don't know.
So Holmes is contemporaneous, right? Like, he's around doing shit.
But see, that to me kind of makes it almost boring if he solves it.
Yeah.
That's a bit like...
That's why I raised him immediately, so we can go, okay.
Miss Marple, the people off the Midsummer Murders. Whoever the police are, Midsummer Murders.
I'm going to throw in a curveball and put a shout in for Edgar Allan Poe's Inspector Dupin.
Oh, Murders of the Rue Morgue Man.
He'll solve the mystery in an incredibly racist way and find some way of making money out of it.
Oh, Hyde will turn out to be an orangutan this whole time. Oh no! Terrible adaptation idea. Hyde was just an orangutan this whole time.
just 3 orangutans in a trench coat is Dr. Jekyll.
No.
And Hyde
I
is
wish
the one
I hadn't
coming
had
out
that.
on-
Do you know what I do find very funny about that image is that you've got this crowd of like Victorian people going like, there's something wrong with this guy, but I just can't put my finger on it. And he's just an orangutan. Like he's just straight up like the librarian, you know?
I mean, it kind of fits because doesn't the Inspector Dupin is the Murders of the Rue Morgue thing, right?
Yes, there's a couple of ones. There's the the Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is the racist orangutan one.
Yeah.
There's also another one where there's this whole thing about a stolen letter, and the police are going to insane lengths to try and find it. And he says, "Oh no, it's here." And in both cases, it's basically strongly implied that he's either A, making shit up, and or B, making a bunch of money on the side from this.
If he was the narrator, I feel like you could blend these two really nicely. If he was narrating and solving this crime, he would decide that Hyde was an orangutan. I mean, the murders are quite similar, aren't they? It's the kind of the really brutal violence that comes out of nowhere and doesn't make any sense.
Oh, again, because of racist violence, this was back when, people of colour are actually just less evolved and they're more like monkeys, and apes are violent. Apes are not that violent. Well, okay, maybe gorillas can be under certain circumstances.
But so can humans, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, that kind of plays with the whole Hyde being described as troglodytic. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Troglodytic, caveman-like.
I think that's...
Which is another thing of the Victorians being like, the progress of man towards civilization, blah, blah, blah.
So my favourite terrible detective is Dr. House MD from the show.
Oh my god, that would be incredible!
Can you imagine a Jekyll and Hyde episode of House? I want it very badly.
Gosh. Yes. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm so here for that. Oh my god.
I mean, the thing is, I just say, if it was House, then the way it would end would be that he'd wind up losing his medical license for prescribing estrogen to her.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that does. Yeah. Huh. I've completely forgotten all other fictional detectives.
Well, on that note, would we like to take a guess at what our beloved cat Gothmog would think? So I want to give a quick Gothmog update, right? We were talking about this book in the kitchen, Em and I, and Gothmog was standing outside the kitchen meowing. So, she wants to join in the conversation, but she still does not know how to read. Yeah. Which is not her fault. We just got to keep trying. We just got to keep trying, recording more podcasts.
We need to do more audiobooks for her, really. I'm sure she understands us when we speak.
I did try and sit down and read Beowulf to her when we were doing Beowulf, but she was not interested.
Terrible.
What do we think she would think of this book?
Well, there's definitely crimes and some murders, which, is very cat-like.
Crimes of a vague and unspecified nature, which is her specialty.
That's true.
She'll walk into the room and you're like, you've been doing crimes of a vague and unspecified nature.
Is there technically backstabbing because he writes a weird will, which, let's be honest, Utterson's going to have a really weird legal way of trying to get out of the weird will that, he's somehow agreed to fulfilling for Jekyll and or Hyde?
I mean, there's abdication of responsibility, which is also, I feel, she doesn't have responsibilities, but if she did, she would abdicate them.
Hyde as a kind of Terry Pratchett cat-esque figure that is just, he's Grebo. He's Grebo.
Yeah, Grebo. I was going to say he's Grebo.
There's skulking.
Yeah, no, I think it's a reasonably high rating.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's sulking. There's a little hideaway. Well, there's 2 hideaway corners, in fact.
There aren't any actual cats. Were there any cats mentioned in this book?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. So we're not as high as Temeraire, which...
Oh, I mean, Temeraire was the pinnacle. I mean,
but
the main character is a big flying cat, you know?
I'm leaning towards a 7 or an 8.
I was going to go with a 7.
I feel a solid 7 is I'm gonna
They're
write
like
that down.
again, they're only
that
fun
down.
crimes in our imaginations. They're not
Yes.
textually fun crimes.
No, we can have fun crime readings.
Well, but she can't because she can't read.
Yeah, that's true.
She can't have them yet.
But see, this
Yeah.
is interesting. Do we think she's capable of critical interpretation without being able to read? Because reading in the sense of... M disappears up their own arse. Anyway. Never mind. Yes, okay, 7. Are we happy with a 7?
7 sounds good.
I think the 7 is solid.
Awesome.
And
Also, I'm sorry, I have a random other fun question for you. Do we think Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, who doesn't actually have a PhD, and Jekyll would get on? Or do we think they both think they're the most insufferable people alive?
Oh, no. See, Jekyll is an old man and Frankenstein is an undergrad. It's more like, kind of... I'm thinking like the most cursed version of Back to the Future with Doc Brown and Morty.
I think Jekyll would want to study Frankenstein like a bug. I don't have anything to back this up. I just think it would be a funny dynamic.
I think Frankenstein would have a crush, like an academic crush on him. The way isn't there one professor in Frankenstein that he's like really obsessed with because he's got a beautiful voice, and then Jekyll's just like, why is this young man following me around? Why does he keep bringing me small bits of corpse? Make it stop.
please go away. Maybe like, please get high to make him go away. Freaking me out.
I mean, Stevenson absolutely did also write a short story about body snatching, which is sometimes included alongside Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes, I've got it in my edition, yeah.
Do you think Frankenstein, who does not have a PhD, and Hyde would get on? Do you think Hyde would help him with the body snatching?
I think Hyde would murder him. I think Hyde would find him so fucking annoying. He'd open his mouth and Hyde would be like, time for my next brutal murder.
Once again, critical support for Hyde,
Yeah, that's true. You've got to respect a guy who, as soon as Frankenstein opens his mouth, wants to kill him on sight.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining Hyde just going, why don't you reanimate yourself some pussy?
Here's the thing. Crucially, he does try to do that for the creature, and it doesn't work.
I think he'd just be confused. He'd be like, what are you?
He'd be uninterested. I do think Hyde, in some ways, is cat-like in the sense that Jekyll talks about, like, I'm Jekyll and I want to keep living. But I'd be sensible of the loss of the ability to be Hyde and, like, the ability to do crimes and whatever. And Hyde is just like, fuck that old guy.
Yeah.
That's very cat-like to me.
Technically, this person is keeping me alive, but also consider, fuck that guy.
I think it's my turn with the body for a bit. Right. I think we should probably wrap up. We are now over an hour and one time.
I want to know. What else have you guys been reading? / recommend a book.
I have a horror recommendation. Ooh. Which is it The Hollow Places? It's just, it's The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, which is Ursula Vernon's adult fiction, sort of, grown-up, non-young adult or kids fiction name. And it was really good. It was a first-person narration book that I did not hate. Just so readable, enjoyable. The voice of the main character, was just so fun and engaging, and it made me cry at the end. There was real heart to it, as well as being a phenomenally executed weird horror story. Yeah. So really enjoyed that, and that's The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher.
I think the nearest most recent book that I've been reading has been Nate Crowley's Gazkul Thraka, Prophet of the Warg. Which I would recommend just because he really gets the idea that orcs are not just stupid, but profoundly stupid. So they will occasionally reveal fascinating truths about the human condition through incredibly stupid things.
Yes, excellent. I love the sound of this.
I mean, I'm trying to think what have I read recently. I mean, I've continued listening to Harrow the Ninth. Which, yes, I am still having to use the Wikipedia to sort of understand what's going on, but I am enjoying it.
That's very valid.
Just in general Discworld, just in general, many Discworld, but that is just in general my life now. I'm just okay. Just listen to. I finish a Discworld, I start the next one.
Excellent.
that I'll eventually get through them all, and then I'll like just start listening to them all again because they're glorious. And if you don't listen to them, and you're like me, and you never listened to them before or read them, you're missing out. Go read them.
So I recently went to my parents, and this meant that I finally got round to reading a book that my mum has been trying to get me to read for a long time, which is called Remarkably Beautiful Creatures, and I do not remember the author's name. And I will be on the reference post. I'll find it and put it on the reference post. But it's about an old woman who works in an aquarium and makes friends with an octopus, and the octopus helps her find out what happened when her son disappeared mysteriously, like 50 odd years ago. And it sounds like magical realism, and it's not magical realism, but it's very, very good. Like, exquisite character work. Just very, like... I love a book that can make characters be three-dimensional and have deeply unlikable qualities, but you still kind of root for them anyway.
Thinking of books that did that for me, I read the Annihilation, the Southern Reach trilogy, but I think there's a fourth one on the way. And that has one of the central characters who you sort of learn a lot about posthumously. And it's sort of like, oh, she's completely unsympathetic at the start. And then as you read more and more, you realize maybe she was the only sane person around. Which, yeah, just really, really cool.
Yeah. Cool.
And if you haven't read those books, go add them to your list and then read them. And then tell us about it in an email. But thank you all so much for listening. As always, remember to follow us on your podcast platform so you're all up to date with the latest episodes that are going to be coming out for our 4th series, which is wild, later this year. Very exciting. And if you want to recommend us a book, you can connect with us on our socials or send us an email, teachingmycat2read@gmail.com. But say hello, send us a message, and recommend us some books to read. Big virtual hugs, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.